right. As Neil just said, we're ready to rock and roll now. All right. So I'm Sherry McLaughlin. I'm the pastor of First Christian Church Olathe. So we are very excited to welcome you here. And I have, Mindy can appreciate this, along with some of the rest of you, added to my resume, Zoom extraordinaire. So I'll be sitting up at the computer while we're doing this to make sure that our guest who's joining us is appropriately welcomed on Zoom. Hopefully that will go well. So along with Becoming Beloved Community and Mindy's work with that organization, part of our KC Disciples Voice for Justice, we're really excited to welcome you here today. You're here because you care deeply about justice, and in particular today we're talking about the ministry of food. Part of the DNA, along with many of the organizations you are from, is to care deeply about living with compassion and doing justice, moving our communities toward a more just community for everybody. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Neil, and he is going to introduce Ben, who's going to be our speaker today, and then we'll hear the documentary and then come back to Ben. So, Neil Heckman, who serves as the food ministry organizer, along with his wife, Cindy. Is Cindy still greeting somewhere? Yeah. At First Christian Church. So, thanks, Neil.
I want to add my welcome to everyone. I'm thrilled that you're here, and I recommend you that are involved every day or every week in a food pantry to connect with the other people that are here that do the same kind of thing every day. I've already made some wonderful connections, and I'm incredibly excited about it. I've found that every time we've made a connection, it's always been a big benefit to the people that visit our food pantry, and in turn to the organization that we connect with. There are so many wonderful relationships in this room today. I'd now like to introduce Ben Collier. Ben is the co-founder and the CEO of the Farmlink project. It's a student-founded organization addressing the intersection of food insecurity, food waste, and the environment. Each year, 20 to 30 billion pounds of fresh produce goes to waste in the United States alone. Farmlink is building creative solutions to food waste. Since April 2020, right after the start of the pandemic, the team has delivered over 100 million pounds of farm-fresh, surplus fruits and vegetables to 400 plus communities around the country, preventing millions of pounds of carbon emissions as a result. I'll let Ben tell the story about the 36 million apples. Ben started Farmlink as a junior at Brown University and has since graduated with a degree in applied mathematics. There's a lot of data in the food industry. He was not the only one in school during the early days of the organization. Farmlink began and operated for over a year as a body of 100 plus volunteer college students and has since evolved to a hybrid model with 20 full-time employees and a base of dozens of college fellows. Ben now lives in Los Angeles, where he works on Farmlink full-time with his remote team. Ben represents Farmlink as a member of the New Profit Health Equity Cohort, exploring access to fresh and healthy food as a key social determinant of health. The Farmlink team has received the Congressional Medal of Honor Society Service Award for their work, and Ben recently accepted the Samuel S. Beard Award for Outstanding Public Service by an individual 35 and under. Long-term, Farmlink aspires to put itself out of business through surplus redistribution and policy reform. The Farmlink project is rebuilding a food system in which every person has access to healthy food with choice, consistency, and dignity. With that, I introduce Ben Collier.
Neil, I was listening to that and realizing, how is the audio, by the way, Sherry? Are we coming in all right here?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yep.
I was listening to that and thinking, I need to shorten my bio a lot, but it's very kind to hear all of that. Thank you. And thank you all so much for joining me and gathering together to have a conversation about food and food waste and food justice. I know that this is something that's central to so many of you, and I'm really very touched to be able to share my experience through the last few years. So, as Neil shared, my name is Ben. I was born and raised in Connecticut. I then went to school in Rhode Island, and while in school, started working on this project. A few months before the pandemic, I'd actually had a really major reconstructive leg surgery following a few years of neurological problems. And so even before the pandemic started, I was already home, already not sure where my sense of community or sense of direction was going. And then the pandemic happened, and suddenly everyone else was in the same position. I didn't expect Farmlink to be what it became when we started, or even a few months in, but it has changed my life, and I'm so lucky to be able to be a part of it. I could tell you the whole story, but that's really what the documentary is designed to do, and I think it tells our origin story very well. What it doesn't do is say where we hope to go from here, and I'm hoping that can be the main topic of our conversation afterwards. So I think Sherry and Neil, unless there's anything else you guys want to talk about now, would love to dive into sharing our story with you all.
Yeah, wish me luck. I'm going to get this right.
I will go camera off while this happens, so there's an uninterrupted view of the film. I also have to compliment, I've seen so many Zoom setups. This is the best one ever. This is the panorama up top. All right, I'll let you watch the film. Thank you.
You know, for most of human history, we've been trying to figure out how to grow enough food to feed the world's population. Literally, we've been living in a food-scarce world. And when you talk to people, most people don't believe that even hunger in America is a solvable problem. Because for most of human history, it wasn't. Until now.
Members of the National Guard are being deployed across the country, and
17 million more Americans could now face hunger because of the coronavirus pandemic.
more families are struggling to afford basic necessities.
Are these students making a big impact? Could they be the ones to tackle this crisis?
Tonight, young people across this country answering the call.
I think we basically had a 1 or 2 month window that we had to start this project, and if we missed that window, I think this would be a different story.
Every college student across the country was feeling the same thing, and it wasn't just hopelessness, it was feeling completely powerless.
A lot of college kids were in a similar situation of wanting to find a way to go out and help, but then not being able to leave our houses. And I almost think that this sense of not knowing, enabled people to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise.
I distinctly remember there was one image that really was the launching of this. I think it was the Pittsburgh Food Bank.
Hundreds of cars lining up for the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank before it opened yesterday.
And it was this drone shot going over a freeway pass with a miles-long lines for cars, and more than half the people were turned away that day.
You know, I had a lady here yesterday with 4 little kids in the car, and she says, I'm a waitress and I don't have any food.
Millions of children rely on their school lunches, and all of our schools closed. Those lunches don't get replaced for those students.
One of our little 12-year-old girls, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning, and this little girl fell out of her desk, passed out, scared me to death. I ran down there to the room, and we called an ambulance. And when we revived her, we found out that she hadn't eaten in 6 days. And her last lunch was the school lunch on Tuesday. This is Monday morning at 10.
The guidance was, what can we do? It's like, you just got to stay home, and that's the most you can do. And you honestly felt like pretty powerless and kind of helpless. And when we then saw that crisis was happening at our local food bank, and they were going to have to close their doors if they couldn't get more food, that's when this thing became really real for us.
My mom was sewing masks for people because there's a mask shortage. There's this PPO shortage. And so the goal at the beginning was to just help in some way.
The most amazing thing that sort of confused us, and it almost didn't know how to make sense of it, was at the same time that we were reading about these mile-long lines at food banks and these food shortages, grocery stores being out of food, we were simultaneously reading articles about farmers being forced to throw away millions and millions of pounds of food every single day. This footage of millions of bananas going to waste, hundreds of thousands of watermelons being smashed, millions of gallons of milk being poured down the drain. And at some point, we were like, you know what, we need to do something. We can't just sit here. We just said, let's connect one farm to one food bank. I'm James, I'm a college student. I'm gonna get hung up on, how did you get my number? Who gave you this? Delete me from this list.
I just called a school bus company and was like, can we move food on the buses? They said no.
No surplus, not here.
And I hopped on Google and for 4.5 hours wrote down every farm that I could find that had been written about.
How is this possible? 75 farmers and not a single one of them has had surplus food. Talking to all these farmers, they don't have anything, and yet I'm reading of this massive surplus.
Oh no, it's not just that this is hard, but we were actually totally wrong about this whole thing.
I mean, it just wasn't even close. Just when we were losing hope on this idea, that was when the problem started to get worse.
1/3 of college students are food insecure. I guarantee you, people don't know that.
So I'm a sophomore at UC Berkeley, and I'm studying the super niche major, honestly. I've never seen it anywhere else. It's called Society and Environment. My background is the reason I am trying to pursue anything in this environmental field. Growing up, my mom worked in the fields. You go in before sunrise and you come out after sunset. They worked hard, and then there wasn't that on the table. We would walk in the neighborhood of where there was apartments, and all the apartments had giant dumpsters. So we would go look through the dumpster, and cause I was small, she'd be like, you go in there. I would if there was unopened stuff, we would just take it, or clothes or whatever. So it was always what is this system? What the heck,
I mean, food is the most basic element for life. And the reality is that in this country, 37 million Americans don't have access to sufficient and consistent nutritious food. And I think that is a root of a lot of our problems. We saw this article in the New York Times, and it focused in on one farmer specifically.
When you close all the restaurants, you change the whole supply chain.
He literally had to take tractors and dig a giant ditch and bury 6 million pounds of onions.
The supply chain is broken, guys. Nobody wants those onions.
If there's any chance that this idea has any hope of working, we're 2 days into this, no one has replied, it is this guy. This is do or die. Picked up the phone, dialed him, and I think he just picks up the phone. Shay Myers here.
That was a really scary moment, actually. Very frustrating, very scary, and we usually know how to pivot. And in that setting, we didn't know what to do. It was just scary.
So what was interesting at the beginning when we were calling people is that we were talking to really small farms who might have been actually more successful because there was more local buying at that time. And Shay Myers was the one who told us, yes, at commercial farms, at large farms, we are struggling.
We had 2 million pounds of onions. We didn't know if we were going to be able to find a home. James and Farmlink called, and I said, come get them. We've got 2 million pounds.
we go pick up that U-Haul, we strap this bed sheet, duct taped onto the back of the side of the car. It says Farmlink. We pick up those age of students, we drive to the farm, we deliver them to the food bank.
After we got in touch with Shay, things happened very quickly. I mean, the first 2 deliveries, both with us driving the U-Haul with the eggs and the delivery from Shay, came back to back.
My name is Martha Barajas. I'm a longtime resident of Compton for 50 years. This is how I feed my family. And not only my family, I feed my neighbors and thousands of cars.
And now the produce is high in the grocery stores, so to be able to come here and to receive this food is wonderful.
We had so much to learn so quickly. So I remember we got connected with another charitable food organization, and we said, hey, we see this problem that's happening across the country. We know demand has doubled. This is our organization. We're moving all this food. Is there anything that we can do to help? Because we know you guys understand this space. And I remember them kind of like looking at us, almost like laughing.
And they said, you guys can't help. Like, just keep, just keep hanging out of your houses, worry about your families. We got this covered. I'm sorry, but you don't have it all handled. So if there's any small way we can help, even, just locally, just let us know. But we were totally kind of brushed off.
I mean, it was a national organization with serious resources. If they wanted to, they could snap their fingers and move all of this food. But yeah, they're slow to responding to it. And it wasn't just one, it was multiple organizations. Good for you guys for doing something, but we'll take it from here. It really pissed me off. I remember leaving that call angry but motivated as ever that we had something to prove.
And I don't think anybody had any idea of what was going to happen next.
This is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Finally tonight here, the children teaching us what it means to be America strong.
So someone just texted, you guys are on the world news. Immediately, everything just blew up.
ABC World News Tonight is the most watched newscast in the entire world.
Tonight, young people across this country answering the call. College students starting Farmlink, connecting farmers with food banks.
Students from all around the country started responding to our little website.
Hi Farmlink, my name is Jane.
I'm Alex. I'm Annika Patel. I'm a sophomore at Bates College.
I grew up food insecure and wanted to make sure other people didn't go food insecure.
Suddenly we had a team of 100, 150 people
hauling thousands of farmers a day.
We're sending food from Oregon to California, all the way out to Florida. We're getting food from the East Coast.
All the adults in the world haven't figured out how to end world hunger, but these college students aren't willing to take no for an answer. Like, that gets people's attention.
I remember we had this one goal. Let's move 1 million pounds of food. And if we could do that, that would be amazing. And within 3 weeks, we'd moved 1 million pounds of food.
In a day and a half, we had $150,000 in our friend's bank account. Like, holy.
This is something much bigger than any of us realized.
We love it. Good night.
Now this is the crew I've got to work for me, and you talk about pains in the rear, we got them. And that man right there, I hadn't seen him do a day's work in 6 months, so I'd like to get him on camera for sure. I'm doing good right now. We're in the northeastern part of Oklahoma. We're probably 70 or 80 miles from Tulsa, but we're basically a rural area. Now that the groceries have gotten higher, our crowd's getting bigger, and it's gaining every day. We're getting more now than we were 2 months ago, just because of the price of food.
Millions of families were still flooding a charitable food system that was never designed for a crisis. At the time, we'd moved 1 million pounds of food, But the thing was, to really change things, we'd have to move 100 million pounds of food. And it was like, how are we gonna do that? Because our whole team, we're in school right now, half our team is in finals. Hey, it's been a week, we haven't moved any food. Hey, it's been 2 weeks, we haven't moved any food. Is this really gonna kind of work? It definitely settles in, hey, we have an important role to play here and we need to step it up, and we sort of need to put, school and life and all those other things on hold, and this is what we need to be focused on right now. And it was like, just a cascade of people who all of a sudden jumped ship and said they're all in.
The biggest thing that became interesting to me was the logistical processes that broke down as the agricultural supply chain became untethered. Whether it's going to go to waste in the field, in transition, while it's being moved to a grocery store, when it's at the grocery store, we want to make sure that Farmlink can capture any of that waste.
Jordan and Caroline were like superheroes. They were flying, remember I described that potato deal that took like 30 hours for us to coordinate? They were coordinating like 40 of those every week.
We worked with the Navajo Nation, and we worked in Bakersfield, in Brooklyn, we did a deal in Hawaii, we were all over.
Yeah, I got this one guy on the line. I don't remember exactly where the farm he was from. I think it was around 3,000 pounds of potatoes. This food's gonna go off and literally help thousands of people, and that was kind of like that. Oh shoot, this is the impact that this organization can have.
The missing link is just the transportation. It's the logistics to get it there, and that's what we can do. I think what we started to realize is, all of Farmlink, all the students, we were united by one mission. People were there for a lot of different reasons. I remember one student, Joe, and he's literally the most lively kid you've ever met. And I remember, we've known him now for 4 months, and we're at our end of ceremony thing, and everyone's sharing, and I remember Mark, he starts speaking, and he's so positive, hey everyone, and he explained to us that just a few months before that, his dad passed away from COVID. And he explains this was the only thing that kept him going, was Farmlink. Instantly, just bawling, crying.
My dad was a believer in helping people. He came from a very rough background himself, and he always believed in paying it forward in any way he could. And, it's something he instilled in me, and it was a way of feeling closer to my dad, and also fighting back against what took him from me.
Even the people in the most pain right now were willing to do something to help others. And I think for a lot of people, and myself included, Joe sharing that with us was just proof of how strong the bonds are.
One by one, as the world seemed to return to normal, we were seeing all these organizations that had popped up during the last 2 years start to go away.
A lot of people came together to support healthcare workers and first responders. So my line of questioning was, is this it, or are you going to go the distance?
People kept asking us, oh, the pandemic's over, there won't be any more surplus food, right? And it's like, no, that's completely wrong. This is literally just the beginning.
It feels like we have one of the biggest opportunities to solve a major issue that I could possibly imagine, and it's right in front of us. Every single year, 30 to 40% of the food that's grown, that's quality, nutritious food, goes to waste. Doesn't even make it to the grocery stores, doesn't even make it to your table.
These 7 grains of rice represent the average amount of food someone eats in a lifetime. And then this is how much food goes to waste in America each year.
This was not a problem caused by the pandemic. These were systemic issues that were exacerbated by those conditions. And people are really starting to talk about it.
This is a tomato I bought from the grocery store. And here are 3 tomatoes that would have been thrown away on a farm. Can you spot the difference? This one here is a little too mushy. This one has a small dent in it. And this one, well, suppliers cut the contract last minute, so it has nowhere to go. And it's not just one tomato here and there. It's a whole system designed to throw away 30% of all food.
We're growing enough food to feed every person on this planet. We're growing enough food to feed the population nearly 2 times over. And I think when we started to realize, wow, this is much bigger than just the pandemic, than just responding to the crisis, we needed to bring in the big guns.
My name is Luis Fernando Yepes.
Where are you from?
I was born in Ciudad Obregón, Sonora, Mexico. I decided to join Farmlink because I believe with my whole heart that we can create a system which will allow everyone to have access to food, to make sure that we give aid to communities that have been neglected for decades. I grew up with a lot of people that even working all day, every day, they couldn't make enough to eat. I grew up with kids that their idea of lunch was to go to the fruit trees and, taking a mango to eat. I see food recovery as an arrow that is breaking new ground as it hits space. And in the Farmlink project, I saw the future. I saw the Farmlink project being the tip of that arrow.
There are people who are experts in their domain who are choosing to join Farmlink because they view it as this movement for change. We have Mike Meyer, this Texas farmer who knows U.S. agriculture like the back of his hand, and Luis Yepes, who has spent his entire life thinking about how we can rescue food throughout the supply chain. And what unites everyone is still what united us at the start. It's this feeling that we are doing something really special and something new and urgent and important.
Mike sent us this memo, and you start to go through it, and it shows us one county in Texas, and population this many people, percent food insecure, this many percent. All of a sudden, you finish this math, you follow it, and for $75,000, we can solve hunger in that county. And I remember Mike just going, "We're going to do this block by block. We're going to do this county by county and state by state, and we actually can bring an end to this."
This was just a project to help our local food bank. And now it's grown into something that has the capacity to feed millions of people every single day with dignity.
But we can only do it if we can all work together. It's going to take a movement of people.
Farmlink.
Farmlink. Want to give the Farmlink project a check for $15,000.
Oh my God. I've seen food waste in my entire career, and this group is tapping into something really special.
大学生が立ち上げたプロジェクト、Farmlink.
Just this week, more than 600,000 avocados distributed at FDR Park.
1 million pounds of food. Farmers and food banks telling them they are grateful.
People don't think students are really capable of anything. I'll leave this to the adults.
As of yesterday, we've saved 60 million pounds of food.
And I think what we really believed was that in times of crisis, it's young people who step up to lead.
change once I come fully back on screen? I'm not sure.
Yep, you're back up.
Hello.
There we are. Yep, you're good.
Hi Neil, hi Sherry, hello everybody. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. I think it's rare to have a group of folks that are so dedicated to supporting their community who've volunteered to be here in the way that you have. And I'd be so happy to share a little bit more about Farmlink. I am curious how we can make this as conversational as possible, how we can turn this into more of a Q&A or something that allows us to share information in both directions.
Well, Ben, even though we haven't talked before today other than a little bit via email, I kind of had that in mind too. I've got one question that just popped in my head as I walked up here. Can you tell us about the story about the apples that you rescued the end of last year to get us started?
I can, absolutely. And I think I'm going to share a little bit of context on top of that. So we talked about in the documentary a little bit how Farmlink was not immediately something that every food bank just welcomed with open arms. And I don't know that, truthfully, we deserved to be. We were a bunch of 20-something-year-olds that had no experience in this space. But truthfully, the first time I spoke with a food bank, I had spoken with a farmer that had 30 truckloads of cucumbers with nowhere to go in Florida. And it was a cucumber farmer that turned their cucumbers into pickles. Nobody was making pickles in May of 2020. And so they had 30 truckloads of cucumbers. And a local food bank actually called me and said, this is our donor. You can give us a donation, but you need to back off. And they were going to recover 5 of those truckloads, so 25 still had nowhere to go. And we knew we could find a home for them. And the food bank actually called the farmer with me on the phone and said, these kids are scamming you, and hung up. And 1 million pounds of cucumbers went to waste. Now, I don't share that to say, this is how I view food banks, this is how I view the system. It's to share that there is a natural territorialism that we didn't expect in this space when we started. And what we realized was so many food banks for so long have been forced to just fend for themselves. I'm here to support the people that are showing up at my food bank in my line. But the reality is there are people just down the street at the food bank right there that might be the same customers. They definitely have the same mission. And so when we started to see that there was this disconnect where food banks weren't able to work with each other, where when one food bank had more food than it needed, another food bank down the street wasn't getting connected, that's where we thought we could make the most impact. And so, Neil, you asked about these apples. In September, we connected with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. A handful of apple processors had just pulled out of their contracts about a month before harvest. And this happens more than I ever realized. Every single year, these moments of huge surplus, one of the reasons being supply and demand shifts that quickly. And so about a dozen apple growers had 40 million apples with nowhere to go. That's about 13 million pounds of apples. It's 400 truckloads full of each about 100,000 apples. And so local food banks were ready to take 5, 10 truckloads over the course of a few weeks, but there were still hundreds with nowhere to go. And this is where Farmlink is so well equipped to support this system. And so over the next 6 weeks, we worked with 100 food banks across 20 different states to distribute over 36 million apples to all of those communities. And it was 3 times larger than the largest moment of food recovery that this food bank system has ever taken on at once. And that's not to say, oh, Farmlink did this. We just helped connect the dots. 100 different food banks made this happen. But I think when you look at where I started with that cucumber story in 2020, something like this didn't feel possible then. And it was never taking place before that. And so that apple story to us is a proof of concept for really what is possible during these moments of huge surplus.
Ben, I've got 2 more questions. What do you see as the biggest steps you're taking to change the systems and policies that need to be changed to improve the food system in the United States?
That's a good question. When it comes to policy, there is a lot of funding that is dedicated to supporting farmers and feeding families. And a good example is in 2020, Were any of you familiar with the USDA Farmers to Families Food Box program? It was a few $1 billion that the USDA used to purchase huge amounts of food from major food. But there was this issue where, for example, we worked with Borden Dairy. It's this huge dairy company. And the USDA purchased 700 million servings of dairy from Borden. And then Borden was expected to equitably distribute that amongst communities around the country. The problem was, not only has Borden never distributed 700 million servings of dairy equitably and thoughtfully, nobody has distributed that food effectively into the system before. And so what we saw is we're 3 months into Farmlink, we helped connect hundreds of communities to Borden. That wasn't even really our main mission, but we just saw it as this gap. And so when it comes to policy, I actually think that there is the policy in place to distribute funding, but there's not the relationships in place between that government funding, the for-profit food system that's distributing that food, and the charitable food system that can actually effectively get it to the community level organizations that are focused on distributing food with dignity. And so for us, the biggest way we hope to make an impact in policy is to be involved in that middle step, the logistics in between. I actually spoke with the Senior Director of Nutrition for the USDA, the person who was involved with that program in 2020, and I said, how did you guys think about the logistics piece? And he told me, oh, I guess we didn't really think about it, which in hindsight is something that happens a lot with government funding, and at the same time it feels crazy. And it's something that I think we can really help with.
Like you, I would share, it's all about connections. And that's where we have to go to change the system. I'm glad we're on the same page. What challenge do you see Farmlink solving in 2024, and where do you need help?
That's a great question. One of the challenges I hope to solve is in demonstrating that this entire industry, this whole charitable food system, is aligned behind the same sets of values. And that's not maybe what you thought I was going to say, but I've spoken with so many individual employees and volunteers at food banks, food pantries, church groups, community level organizations distributing food. All of them are willing to talk about how the food banking system hasn't evolved much in decades, and how we need to be prioritizing innovation that better allows us to recover as much food as possible, and collaboration that allows us to share more food between communities when one has access to more than they need, and democratization so that if one community has a really useful set of tools or information, they can share it with another, because ultimately we need to be tracking our impact individually on the towns and the communities that we serve, but also nationally and beyond.
You're back now.
You're back. Did the audio get cut out?
A little bit.
At the end.
Okay.
Yeah, at the end.
I'll just rewind a little bit and just share. Tracking our impact as a whole, I think, is really where we're seeing systemic progress in the impact of our food system on climate and on effect of hunger. And so one thing that we've been working on for the last 6 months, actually, is a pledge. We're calling it the Shared Plate Pledge, and it's not public yet, but I would love to share it with all of you. And our goal is to say these are a set of values centered around innovation, democratization, and collaboration that any individual, food pantry, food bank, farmer, grocery store can sign, and it's to show these are the values that we really want to uphold and prioritize. And I strongly believe that if these were what was followed for the last 40 years, we would be in a little bit of a different place with how we're looking at hunger in this country. And so that's something that I really hope to bring and to turn to folks who know what need looks like in their own communities to help us better understand how we can make that collaboration piece even more united and visible over the next year. That was a long-winded response.
And we need to get the truckers to sign that too. It looks like he froze again. I want to invite anyone that would like to come forward and ask a question. And I think it's best if you just face this way, then the owl will show you so that Ben can see you. And everyone here will be able to hear your question if you speak into the microphone. So please come forward. There's no wrong question. I think this is a learning opportunity for all of us. And I believe that connections are going to come out of this today that will help us in Johnson County and in the greater Kansas City community to make some big steps forward on bringing more dignity and more value and more connections to help those that are in need of food. So please come forward and ask questions.
And if you do come forward, I would please ask that you introduce yourself, and if you have any ties to this work or this space that you are willing to share, I would love to hear.
This is way too high for me. Okay. You ready? I am wondering how you fund the trucks that transport the food around the country. Did you get that?
Yes, he did.
Sorry, I don't know if that's on.
Look like it. Okay.
Okay, here we go. Sorry, Ben. I don't know if that's on our end or not, but.
Well, I'll pause whenever it looks like I'm frozen. Our main cost is transportation. It's the employees that are working for our team, and then it's the trucks. And so we're a fully independent nonprofit. And to date, we fundraised from a mix of individual giving, so folks who see us on the news and say, I want to support those guys. Foundation grants, and then corporate partners. So we've had some really great support from some organizations that have chosen to believe in us since early on, like Chipotle and Kroger and Carhartt. So it's a mix of all three. I think that one of the biggest areas for sustained funding that we can start to tap into in the next couple of years is that government funding piece that I was talking about too.
Hi, Ben. My name is Michelle Ross. I'm with the Johnson County Food Policy Council, and we touch everything around food systems in the county. What I was wondering is, when you started your work, the world looked a little bit different with the pandemic, and it may have been easier to move things very long distances. There's a lot of cost involved. You were working with a lot of the commercial farmers. How does the world look now, a few years later, as we've kind of evolved out of the pandemic in terms of making those connections? And with that, what technology are you using to help make those connections better? As well as what barriers are you facing that perhaps you didn't have a couple years ago? Because we saw people being a lot more creative and innovative during the pandemic. It seemed like a lot of the chains were off. And as we kind of evolved out of it, we're finding ourselves kind of tied back to a lot of policies or maybe lack of education. So could you just talk about those things?
Sure, that's a great question, and nice to meet you. What I think has not really changed as much as I expected it to is the volume of food waste and the frequency of moments of huge surplus that exist in this system. I think I said it in the doc literally like this. I said this wasn't a problem caused by the pandemic, it was exacerbated or highlighted by it. And so there were some moments in the beginning of the pandemic, like I told you, the cucumbers that usually get turned into pickles that have nowhere to go, that happened. And that was unique to the pandemic, but that farmer is still gonna have moments with that much surplus in most years. And so what's changed for us over the last few years in a good way is our credibility has completely transformed. In 2020, we were a bunch of kids who knew nothing. Now we're a bunch of kids working with a bunch of more experienced people who have moved almost 200 million pounds of food. It's a lot harder to slam the door on our face. In terms of the technology and the relationships, one interesting evolution that I've seen is the agricultural space appears and feels far more open to acknowledging the issues of food waste. And acknowledging that it's no individual farmer or food shipper's fault that there is surplus and there is food waste. 30 to 40% of all the food we grow has gone to waste for decades. And so now you're starting to see farmers say, okay, this is an inevitable part of the system. Here's what we're going to do to make the most of it. And in 2020, what I experienced a lot more than I do today is a farmer picking up the phone or talking to me at a conference and saying, you know, we run a really tight ship. We don't really have surplus here. And quite frankly, that's not true. And I think the fact that there's a comfort around acknowledging that is really productive. In terms of technology, I think you would agree from your experience, agriculture, transportation and logistics, and the charitable food system and food banking are not leaders in technology adoption. Most truck drivers, most farmers, the way they want to communicate is picking up the phone, texting, or emailing. And so a lot of people have approached us saying, are you going to build an app? Are you going to make a marketplace? And the reality is we can do a lot of internal improvement to make our process more efficient. The human touch point is still how we're getting through to most folks, and that's okay. I think that looking forward, the way that we hope to see the system evolve is through continuing to own and want to be involved in making the system more efficient. And I will note, farmers are more open to the ideas of climate change. I have farmers who are standing up at conferences and saying, I was raised to believe climate change doesn't exist, but I can see in front of my own eyes that we have less water in California today than we did 15 years ago. And so I think that as those conversations become more normalized and the well-being of farmland and farmers in general becomes of a greater concern, finding solutions that allow us to become more sustainable and to make the most of the resources that we are creating, it's something that people want more. And it creates more of a space for farming to exist and for all the other organizations that are doing that kind of work too. I don't know if I answered every element of that question, so if there's anything I missed, please let me know, but thank you for asking.
We have some more questions. Clay, you got one?
Thank you all for coming all the way up. I appreciate it.
Hi, Ben. My name is Clay Jarrett. I'm the Director of Programs for After the Harvest, which is started out as a gleaning organization here in the Kansas City area, but we do some similar work with the truckloads and bringing in truckloads of B-grade produce and things that have been graded out. And I just want to say congratulations, and it's really impressive. And we started in 2014 and have been able to rescue about 32 million pounds of food in that time. But just hearing the numbers of what you've done in the last few years is just amazing. So we would love to connect with you in any way that we can to do that work together in the Kansas City area.
I would love that. Just blanket call. Neil, please share my email with anyone here, and we'll connect the right people on our teams to yours. That would be great. And the numbers thing is so funny. We got very lucky that we just said, hey, we're from all across the country, we're all in our bedrooms right now, let's just look at this problem at the highest level possible. And so it allows us to take on these huge numbers, 36 million apples, but the reality is there's not a single truckload of food that we could rescue if we weren't partnering with an organization in the cities that are actually focused on supporting and serving their communities. So it is all a very hand-in-hand process.
Thank you.
I'm going to put in another plug here for these green cards. This is the way we can all be sure we're connected and that we're connected the best way. I have most of your email addresses. I think you got emails from me. But if there's a better email address for you, that's a reason to fill this out. And also your phone number could be helpful. So please fill those out. And there's a collection tray in the back. I think it's silver. And it's on a little table as you leave. So if you'd put those in there. Ben, I had another question. Government funding. Is there government funding from the federal government for truckers that would encourage them to haul food at a lower rate for a Farmlink project?
That's exactly what we're trying to find out right now. There is funding. There's a mix between, there's funding within the agricultural marketing service, and I'm just learning about all this. Some of you might be experts in this more than I am. But the agricultural marketing service is a group within the USDA that has a lot of funding specifically for supporting farmers and feeding families. And what we're trying to communicate is the transportation and logistics in between is the support that is most needed to support farmers and feed families. Whereas I think historically, it's been thought that that money has to go to farmers or it has to go to the communities that are procuring the food. And there hasn't really been an organization that sits squarely in between like what we're doing. And so between there and the Department of Transportation and some other corners of the government, we're trying to learn about that. As I said, we haven't actually unlocked government funding yet. And I think that's going to be a big part of our messaging over the next few years is how can we leverage all the individual donations we're getting to show at a federal level this is something people believe in, this is something that can really help folks. This goes hand in hand with all the other missions in the charitable food space that are doing similar work and just serves to compound that impact. So I do believe it's there, Neil. I think it's our job over the next year to figure out how we can crack that code.
Have you connected with any logistics companies that are willing to share backhaul information with you, where you can typically get trucking at a lower rate?
Yeah, 20 to 40% of trucks on the road at any given moment are fully empty. And so I think backhauling is a terrific concept to explore. I think for that to really work, and this is one of our goals for this year too, it's like you read our annual planning sheet. We're trying to figure out who is the right partner where we could convince them, have a guy on your team track our loads that need to go out. And I was actually just meeting with the Kroger headquarters in Cincinnati on Wednesday, and I talked to them about this. I said, if you could have one member of your team look at this and say, okay, Farmlink has trucks that need to go from Tucson to Los Angeles, from Omaha to El Paso, and 5 other places around the country. Well, 3 of them, we actually have a driver that's coming back to a distribution center empty. Maybe we could hop on that truck. I think that it takes a partner that's really looking to tell a great story and make a great impact. And I think now at this point, we're moving enough food. We have enough of an organized data set to be able to communicate with a team that could happen. The closest thing we've come to that was in 2020, Uber has an Uber Freight. And just like you book a car from point A to point B, they'll connect you with a truck driver that'll bring your 40,000 pounds of, zucchini from point A to point B. And so they gave us about $1 million worth of free freight on their platform. And the more we can get partners like that, that's just the most impactful kind of donation or in-kind donation we can receive. So I hope if we talk 6 or 12 months from now, I can be letting you know about all the great transportation partners that we've been able to really crack into in 2024.
If I remember correctly from my 50 years in the office furniture industry, the biggest competition for trucking was agriculture. I would think somewhere in the agricultural field, you could find a logistics company who's probably using AI now to figure out how you know about all the backhauls in the country, because that's probably the biggest place you're going to save money. And maybe you can get them to do like Uber's done and donate it to you. And I think when you start talking to those people, I'd ask each one of them, who would you refer me to? Again, it's all about connections.
I completely agree. Often, the right person is one introduction away from you. And so if you can get someone to say, all right, who in my world, who in my network is the one person I would say they need to know of Farmlink, it is so valuable. All of you, I'm sure, the same applies. When it comes to logistics, we have a nuance where if it's a certain type of produce, it can go on a normal truck. If it's going a very short distance, it can sometimes go on a normal truck. But for most of the produce we recover, it needs to go on a refrigerated truck, which limits the scope. There's still millions of trucks that this can fit with. And so I agree with you. I think that we need to show the potential impact that could really come of this. there also are subsidies and credits and reimbursements that these organizations could be open to if they participate. And so I really think it's about showing the impact and inviting someone to really feel like they're a part of this, which, I mean, hey, imagine you're running a fleet of Kroger trucks and suddenly you have all this footage of Kroger trucks rolling up to food banks around the country distributing beautiful free produce to amazing community organizations. It's not bad in terms of a story to tell and a brand to build.
Do we have more questions? Mandy?
Hi, I'm Mindy Fuggerino. I'm the pastor at Independence Boulevard Christian Church, and we have what's called the Micah Ministry, where we serve about 500 people every Monday night with a hot meal and a lot of other basic needs kinds of things, including medical care. And we're actually beneficiaries of After the Harvest. And we go there every week and get some of their stuff and hand it out. We also go regularly to Harvesters, which is kind of our big food bank for the greater Kansas City metro. And I'm actually just curious if you're aware of how much Farmlink has or hasn't been able to connect with the food banks and things here in our Metroplex, and if there's anything that we might be able to do to help improve that if there's a issue there. And I have another follow-up after you answer that.
Yeah, sure. It's great to meet you. I think the answer is it starts with being connected. And so I would love to make sure that the right organizations are in our database and connected. And when we can, it's also a matter of our ability to increase our relationships and our sourcing in a geographical region that makes it feasible and realistic and right to be bringing food to your community. I think that one thing to note, one thing that Farmlink relies on food banks and other organizations with larger capacity for is we deal with such bulk surplus that there are a ton of organizations that take 40,000 pounds of onions. And so connecting with the right partner that can say, yeah, we can take 40,000 pounds of onions because we have 12 or 60 different groups that are going to come and benefit from that product. We want to really make sure that the match is there. And if not, then we want to really prioritize smaller donations that are more, or of a higher variety that can actually meet the need of the communities that we're reaching. So I would say, let's make sure our teams are connected, and we'll go from there. I think the other thing I would note about Farmlink is we are operating at a very high level, to the extent that I would say we have no right to determine what food access should look like within specific communities, where you know what need looks like around you 1,000,000 times better than I do. And so our goal is not to say this is what food access should look like, but it's to say, okay, as much as possible, we're going to equip organizations in communities around the country with enough produce access that they can focus on making that food access as dignified as possible. And so I think we have as much to learn from you all as we have support that we can provide you in terms of how are we advocating the right way, and how are we telling stories the right way. And so I think there's very much a two-way street of learning there.
Thank you for that. And I guess I can reach out to Harvesters and see if they're on your network. But also, as a community organizer, I wanted just to ask that question of policies, and if there's any particular policies, whether that's local or federal, or that you come up against that prevent you from being able to transfer perfectly good food for some reason, or if there's something that would be beneficial for policy-wise for people to be standing behind you on. So, thank you.
Thank you. Well, one policy I'll share that protects us, that if it were to ever be reversed would be really harmful to this space, is the Good Samaritan Act. The Good Samaritan... An act, accepted, can be donated, and if it is donated, the donor forgoes all liability. And working with large farms, there's so much risk to them if they have liability on the food that they are donating, especially if it's coming up against its shelf life or is stuff that hasn't gone through the normal packing process. So that's really essential to preserve. In terms of policy to fight for, at a state level, there is a huge variance of how much a farmer or a food distributor is benefited when they choose to donate. So for instance, in California, there's a quite lucrative tax credit available to people who grow food in California and then donate their surplus. Now, not every state has that. Most states don't have anything at all. And so I think that over the next few years, we're going to start to see penalties that are placed on food growers who let a certain amount of food go to waste that could be donated. But I think matching this stick with a carrot that says, hey, if you donate, we will, as much as possible, try and help you cover the cost of harvesting or packing or shipping that food. And so I think this tax credit component is a really strong way of incentivizing growers and shippers to really participate and seek to be involved in the food donating space.
Do we have more questions? Come on, Michelle. Ben, I know it's a little after 2. Are you good time-wise?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm so appreciative of all of your time. You're the ones who got in the car, walked all the way, come gather for this.
So one other question, you mentioned you work at a high level, but you've also had access to a lot of communities and organizations, and I was just wondering if there was a community or county that you've worked with across the country that you think has been a good practice in terms of connecting the dots within the community between the food banks or food pantries that's worked really well versus everybody kind of doing their own thing.
That's a good question. One example that does come to mind is an organization that we've probably worked with for more food than any other, partially because of where it's located and partially because of how dynamic they are at connecting food with their community. It's an organization called Food Forward. They are based in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't go so far as to even call them a food bank. I think they call themselves an ag hub, where their whole goal is to accept and redirect as much produce as possible. And so one thing that we've experienced is a lot of people who are running food banks have varying levels of experience with inventory management, with supply chains, with food systems, and that makes dealing with fresh produce in particular especially difficult sometimes. And so what Food Forward does really well is they try and say yes to everybody and anybody who's trying to receive food and support their community with it. Whereas I've heard from a lot of different communities around the country, people struggle to actually build relationships with the food banks in certain cases, where they'll say, I am a church group, I am supporting 500 families a week, but the type of food they need, or the regularity they need, or the variety, or the volume is not what a food bank is able to meet. And that is not often the food bank's fault. They're doing as well as they can. They're limited in terms of the amount of focus they can dedicate each partner. But I think that success at a food bank level is measured in how much you're able to meet the need of the organizations at a community level. And I think Food Forward does a great job of that. I think they've done a really good job of that because they've specialized. And they said, we are going to run this warehouse like it is a produce distribution center. And so they can get food in and get it out the same day. Whereas there are many food banks around the country that just don't have the ability to turn around food that quickly. And with fresh produce, that can make it really hard to accept as much and distribute as much as possible. And so I would say over the next few years, one way that we would like to support communities is to figure out, okay, how can we, through resources or training or investing in other ways, support food banks that are really looking to modernize the ways that they are receiving and distributing fresh produce, which, again, is really difficult and something that I'm personally not an expert in at all, and I would need a lot of help with too if I was given that task.
Are there any other questions?
All of these could be a full conversation where I know I'm answering your question. I'm sure all of you have your own thoughts here, so if you do want to respond, I'd be very happy to.
George Gordon, I'm a retired minister, pastoral counselor here in Kansas City area. I'm completely unfamiliar with the process you're speaking of, And it would help me if, can you give us a 5-minute sketch of what the logistics would be of getting a ton of potatoes from Boise to Overland Park, Kansas?
Sure. So our process is pretty simple. So I think I can explain it in less than 5, but we'll see. So if we connect with a farmer in Boise that has 1 million pounds of potatoes, so call it 25 truckloads full of potatoes, what we're typically going to do is start then reaching out to communities around Boise. Because unless we know that we're specifically trying to support a certain community, we don't want to bring food past one town that needs it to bring it to another if we can serve both of them. So we're going to start local and we're going to go out from there. And hopefully that means we're also connected with a food bank, right next door from you. And when we do, we're going to say, hey, we have 1 million pounds of potatoes, but they're so can you accept 1 truckload? And then we'll describe the quality, the type of the potato, the packaging. So we might say, these potatoes are on pallets. Each of them are in 5-pound bags of potatoes. And so if the food bank can say, yeah, we can take a full truckload of potatoes in 5-pound bags, or, hey, we can take a full truckload because I'm going to take half and the food bank down the street is going to pick up the other half. We say, great. What Farmlink then does is coordinate the transportation and logistics, where we know where the potatoes are and we know where they need to go. And from there, we're going to reach out to our logistics partners. So we don't own any of the trucks that we're moving food on. Instead, we work with what are called third-party logistics companies. And what these 3PLs, third-party logistics companies do, is they connect us directly with drivers. And so we say we need this food to go from point A to point B. They'll say we can have a driver here by this time and it'll cost you this much. And we might check with 3 or 5 different 3PLs to see who is the driver that's going to get there the quickest, or who is the driver that's going to get there for the most affordable price. And then we go from there. And so we're paying the truck driver, we're paying the trucking company for the help there. And that's the main cost for Farmlink. It's actually covering the transportation to get it from Boise to wherever it is it's going to be shipped. And then once the potatoes get dropped off there, we collect documentation that confirms, okay, the potatoes started in Boise, they were received in these different communities. And what that allows us to do is for Farmlink, we can track the data and the impact. And then for the farmer, we can go back and say, all right, here's your confirmation that you donated. It allows Farmlink to keep track of all the impact of the work that we're doing, and it allows the farmer to know and file for the appropriate tax benefits or whatever else it is that they would need to track the impact of their donation. If you have any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to elaborate and clarify on any of that part, any parts of that process.
Come on up. We've got another one coming up, Ben.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Karen Whitson. I'm with Renewed Hope Food Pantry. We're a harvester's agency in Overland Park. And listening to you describe the process just brought up some memories of the pandemic. We got a call, hey, we got a truckload, and I don't remember what the food product was, but come in, we're trying to find someone who can receive it, and we need someone who has a loading dock, and we didn't have a loading dock. So I was trying to I'm like, okay, maybe the price chopper across the street would receive it for us, and then they're like, well, can you need a loading dock, and you need a forklift. And I'm like, we don't have a forklift, but then I was calling someone who was gonna let us borrow their forklift. But then they didn't know exactly when this truck would arrive. And I'm like, well, I need to have a whole bunch of volunteers because they can't just arrive and then there's like one person to receive all this product. So they weren't able to give me a good window of time. So I wasn't able to work it out, although we were really close to working it out with the price chopper and having someone, let us borrow a forklift. So timing is really critical when we're working with so many volunteers. And how do we get them mobilized? But then I was thinking about for us here, if we knew, like from our community, well, who does have a loading dock and could have the facility to receive this, if any of us get calls like that, we could send it their way and then share the product. So I just kind of started thinking about those things while I was listening to you talk. So
That's so relatable. I mean, that's how complicated that is. And I maybe breezed over the logistics on our end, but the reality is, yeah, we need then a food bank or a community organization that has a pallet jack or a forklift or a loading dock and the ability to store that produce in a refrigerated area if it needs to be refrigerated for a while. And so it is complicated. I think that what you just highlighted was if there was more visibility into where are those resources around the country or in my community, then there is so much more potential to be participating in these kinds of moments of collaboration. And so maybe one of the things we're going to be doing over the next few years is locating all the pallet jacks and forklifts that organizations know they can be connecting with if they need to in a moment's notice. There's a lot of power, as you were saying, Neil, in connection and collaboration in communities. So.
Well, and I guess the best place would have been at harvesters or after the harvest. I haven't been to after the harvest, so I'm not familiar with their warehouse, but I have been to harvesters, and it definitely would be able to, handle something like that.
And they serve all of Northeast Kansas and Northwest Missouri.
Correct. They're huge. Any other questions? Well, I just want to say a couple things as we close, Ben. I must say that when I first saw this documentary last October, I was filled with hope. There's an opportunity in my lifetime that we can create the connections so that every person has access to healthy food. And I really like Farmlink's words, with choice, consistency, and dignity. Thank you, Ben, for being with us today. Congratulations to you and all of your team on the work you've done and the successes that you've had so far. We've included the URLs for the documentary and the Farmlink project on the bulletin. So if you want to see the film again, you can go to YouTube. That's where that URL will take you. Or you can also go to Farmlink's website and learn more about them. If you've misplaced your bulletin, you can get another one on the way out. We've got plenty. Mindy?
If we want to show it to a group, do we need to get permission?
I don't think so.
No, the video is on YouTube, so we have no control over it anymore. But please feel free to share that link. We would be very appreciative.
And if you want a link that they sent me that might have a little higher quality resolution, I'm happy to forward that to you. That's what we use today. Thank you to all of you for taking time out of your Sunday to join us to talk about ways we can improve the food system to better serve those in need of food. I hope this is a springboard for the county and for the region. I don't see limiting this to Johnson County, but I thought that was the best place to start. And our local food banks to convene more opportunities for us to meet and talk about how we can improve our system and talk about best practices for our food pantries. I don't think food pantries are going away. I haven't had the vision for how you eliminate that yet. But I think we can do better. I think that what Farmlink's doing is making us realize that. Ben, share one other number with us. How many, whatever units you use, of CO2 did we keep from going into the air by rescuing those apples? It was some huge number.
So our estimate is for about every pound of food we rescue, about 3.4 pounds of carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions are being prevented from going into the atmosphere. And something that I didn't elaborate on a ton is 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from just food waste alone. And so if food waste were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases behind only the US and China, which I think maybe was in the documentary. But regardless, it is one of the most actionable ways that individuals and we as a society are actually able to draw down our emissions over a short period of time. And so it's something that is really worth caring about.
All that to say we've got two huge opportunities for improvement. And I'm not saying they're not difficult, but they're achievable. So thank you again. Please meet each other, and I'm willing to stay around as long as we need to talk. So,
And thank you
yeah.
to First Christian Church for your hospitality and for hosting this.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Ben.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Have a great week.
So lovely to meet you all. Thank you so much. Take care.